Why historical inflation rates are meaningless. Yes, I said it, meaningless, and you shouldn't use it in your financial planning, especially retirement planning projections. We'll talk about what you should use instead in a different video, but this one we're just going to debunk any idea that, oh, the inflation rate in the history was this. Okay, so this comes from my new book, Relax and Retire, Josh Scanlon. Josh Scanlon, that's me, my book. Josh Scanlon. Relax and Retire, Debunking Inflation Fears. All right, so you can get the book. If you want a signed copy, just send me an email. I charge $20 for my signature and a book and the cost to mail it and the labor to go to the mailbox. I'm getting ready to go to the mailbox right now and drop a couple books in the mail. So if you want a signed copy, send me an email. I'll send you a PayPal thing, or you can do Venmo, whatever. Just let me know. And of course, if you like these videos, they're helpful to you, and you want to buy me a cup of coffee, the doobie-doo, just buy a cup of coffee, man. $5, decaf, or if you want to buy me 20 cups of coffee, I'll take 20 cups of coffee, decaf. It's in the doobie-doo. All right, so this is going to be chapter, I forgot what chapter it is, but we're first going to go into how inflation is currently calculated. You got to understand how inflation is currently calculated so we can then go back and see how it was calculated previously. All right. Understand that everything from your Social Security to your income tax is based on CPI, Consumer Price Index. And given its importance, you'd think people would understand it, especially financial advisors. And you'd be wrong. It seems very few people know how CPI is actually concocted. Here's how it works. Every year, the BLS, the Bureau of Labor Statistics, conducts the Consumer Expenditure Survey, the CEX. I'm like back at the Army, had all these acronyms, man. Now we got a good one. FAFO. You know what that is? FAFO. You don't have to say it, but if you know what that is, give me a thumbs up. FAFO. I don't know where that came from. That's a good acronym, though. All right. So every year they conduct a consumer expenditure survey, and you can see the various ones in here. All right, and I got links in my book, my hard copy. In the Kindle, you can pick it up. Just click on the link, and here I got links, every single thing in here. You got to cut and paste it. It's not that big. I did a Bitly. So if you, so for instance, this one right here is, right here, bls.gov/CEX. You can type that in 2 seconds flat. The BLS then takes the data from the surveys and calculates what percentages of our spending, American spending, goes to each item which is used to create the CPI. The table below is from the 2021 CPI breakdown. You can see all items as 100%. So we spend 100% of our money on something. 14.26% goes to food and beverages. 42% goes to housing. Apparel, 2.46. What? Transportation, 18.8, medical, 8.5, recreation, 5.11, education, communication, and other goods and services. All right, so a couple of things should jump out at you. First, apparel is only 2.46. That's interesting. Put that in the back of your mind. Food is only 14%. Housing is huge, and transportation is huge. Okay. As you can see, in 2021, food represented 14.25% of CPI. Housing is by far and away the largest component of CPI, accounting for nearly half. All right. So the next time you hear any mention of CPI, I hope your first thought is to remember how big a role housing is. It wasn't always like this, though. All right. We're going to go through the inflation, the CPI over the years. So I'm going to share something else here too, man. So I was talking to a guy yesterday. All right. So transportation. So if you spend $50,000 a year, the CPI assumes you're spending, of that $50,000, $9,000 goes to transportation costs. All right, so I was talking to a guy yesterday, freaking great guy down in South Texas. Guy crushes. All my clients crush. I've had a few that don't crush, but the 99.8%, the third standard deviation is they crush. Anyway, so this guy had a car loan, and his monthly expenses, his retirement projection is like $5,000 a month. But he has a car loan that he's double paying on, so he's paying $800 a month on the car loan. So he's using that $5,000 a month as his projection of retirement expenses. He's using his car loan as part of that. And I was like, dude, that car loan's gonna be paid off next year. But by the time he kind of ends up his working career, so we don't want to project a car loan that's not existing into our future projections. Does that make sense? And so we got rid of the $800 a month. I mean, he's going to pay it while he's working. So you have pre-retirement expenses, post-retirement expenses. Post-retirement expenses, we don't need that $800 a month car loan. Now, before you say, but he's going to need a new car in the future, we're going to go into that in another video in this book. So we got rid of that. Now, that didn't change that much for him because he's FEHB, Federal Employee Health Benefits, and he's got a nice pension. Doesn't have that much in TSP, like $250,000 or something like that, but he's got a big fat pension. 55, I can't remember, 5,000, no, like 4,000 a month or something like that. So it's a nice pension, but it's not, he's not setting the world on fire. But with his pension and Social Security, I was like, dude, between your pension and Social Security and your wife's Social Security, you're making over $100,000 a year. You don't need that much because he doesn't spend that much. All right, so hang tight. We're going to go to the next chapter. Maybe we'll just keep going, actually. So how CPI is calculated over the years. And then we'll show you why you shouldn't. Well, this is why you shouldn't use it right here. In the 1930s, CPI was like this. Food was 34% of CPI. Huh? Clothing was 10.5%. Rent was 18.5%. That's kind of housing. They say rent. But it's interesting. I show in my book, many people did not own their homes back then. Very interesting, actually. But food was 34% of CPI back in the 1930s. What's food now? 14%. Interesting. What's apparel now? 2.46. What was apparel back then? 10.5. Huh. Rent 18.1. Electricity, miscellaneous, including medical care and recreation. A whole bunch thrown under miscellaneous. That was in the 1930s. So when you look at inflation data from the 1930s, you recognize over a third of that was attributed to food. And another 10% to clothing. That's not the same what we're doing today. So to use the previous inflation numbers doesn't make sense. It's only going to get worse. All right, so the CPI market basket of 1950 was still 1/3. This is in 1950. All right, so 1930, food was a third of CPI was a third of that was attributed to food. In 1950, it's still a third attributed to food, but now apparel is 13%, up from 10. Apparel's gone up by 30% in the 1950s. Food and apparel made up 46% of the weight of the index in 1950s. Food and apparel now make up what? Apparel's 2.5%, food's 14.5%, roughly 17%, an eighth. Here's a 1957. Food is now at 28.6%. Housing has gone up to 32.9%. Apparel's still at 9%. Transportation 11%. Now I notice we don't have anything for healthcare. Interesting, yeah? Is that interesting? Let's keep going. Housing replaced food as the single largest item. So housing went from 1950. I don't have it in there. But 1930s, housing was 18% to freaking in 1950 went to 33%. That's a pretty significant jump. Shelter, which fell, and we got shelter here, which fell under the housing category. So these, you don't add these two together. That's 50. That's not, actually shelter falls under the housing category. Shelter's a big one. By 1976, you see below, housing was 34%, where food was down to 23%. Health and recreation was a new category and came in at 19% right here. So here you got food is 23%, housing is 34%, apparel is still 9%, that's food, that's clothing. Transportation is now 13%, health and recreation is 19%. A part of that is medical care, personal care, reading and recreation, other goods and services. So that's the major groups in 1976. In 1977, things changed dramatically, all right, as we can see in the next chart. Housing is now 45%, which consists of three unique groups: shelter, fuel and utilities, and household furnishings and operations. So basically 45% of CPI is housing, 31% is shelter, 6.5% is fuel and other utilities, and 7.5% is that. And those three, shelter, food and utilities, fuel and other utilities, and household furnishings and operations equal that right there. Under the subsect of shelter was rent, 5.27%. Home ownership, 25% was home ownership. Interesting. We got right here, home purchase, financing. So check this out. Home ownership, 25% of all CPI was home ownership, which included home purchase and financing, taxes, and insurance. Let's keep going. Let's see here. What is most interesting is when nearly 31% of CPI was shelter. All right, shelter was 31%. Let's keep going here. 80% of the weighting for shelter, so 31% of CPI is shelter. 80% of that was for home purchase and finance. All right? Home purchase and finance was 81% of shelter. So what if you weren't buying a home? What if you already purchased your home? What if, Pablo, what if you didn't have finance cost? Interesting. Let's keep going. We'll separate. This will be part two. We'll go to part two here in just a second. So we're going to go into here, the owner's equivalent rent, why you should not use previous inflation, because it's nuts.